Hello and welcome to Freya's Tropical Garden. It's a chilly start as the first of the winter weather has arrived. However, here's what we've got coming up for you on today's episode. I plant some of my spring bulbs and show you how to do lasagna planting. I visit Penjerrick Garden in Cornwall. And I make my new flower bed. But first, let's take a look at how my garden's changed since the last episode. Winter preparations are underway now in my garden, so the foliage is looking a bit more sparse than usual and a bit more tattered after some of these winds we've had recently. And of course there are some beautiful autumnal colours like this gold of the ginkgo biloba. This is fully hardy and won't need any protection. And my acer is also starting to develop beautiful hues of orange and yellow. It almost looks like the colours that you'd get in beautiful golden sunshine. And even my smaller acer is producing these lovely shades as well, including some splashes of blood red. 2 weeks ago I showed you that my zingiber gingers were turning yellow, and now my hedychium is doing the same. However, there's no change of colour in the paulonia. The leaves just look withered and are dropping off. But there's still some flowers in the garden, including the beautiful canna patterns, and new flower buds emerging on the canna Russian red, as well as the canna Cleopatra. And of course my salvia amistad is still producing flowers and even still attracting pollinators like this beautiful bumblebee to the flowers. And those salvia bethelii buds that I showed you were forming over the last 4 weeks have finally opened and are a beautiful splash of colour. My arum lily is still producing that one sole flower. None of the other arum lilies have got any flowers at the moment. However, I did get a nice surprise with a calla lily flower that's emerged that I didn't even know was here. This one didn't even produce any flowers in spring. But my winter flowering clematis is producing buds now, so these should flower soon. And my coria is continuing to flower with these beautiful, delicate pink and yellow bell-shaped flowers. And my abutilon, although it's still very, very small, so you have to get down really low to see these flower buds forming underneath. And we've still got masses of flowers on the persicaria. The musabasjus are still pushing through new leaves, although they do look a bit tattered. And I've even got a couple of my ensetes still outdoors at the moment, as they're still growing really well in this mild autumn. I've still got a couple of my alocasias outdoors as well, including this one, which I think is Wentii, which is one of the more hardy alocasias, and my Gagiana, which I left out all of last winter and it did absolutely fine, so I'm going to be leaving another one out this winter as well. However, there are quite a few holes in my garden now where I have been digging up plants to bring indoors or to store in my frost-free grow tent. So the plants I've been digging up are some of my ensetes, including my green ensete ventricosum, my Strelitzia reginae, and I've dug up my Bichonneria diocoides because I was worried about all the rain that we've been having lately, making it too wet. My new tree fern, Dicksonia youngii, hasn't actually been planted in the ground yet, but now this has been moved to a frost-free location. And of course I've spent a bit of time in the garden tidying up some of the plants that have died back to ground level, including the crocosmia and the lilies that had died back a while ago, but I had been leaving to collect the seeds. And I've removed the remains of the sunflowers from around the garden. And in this case they've been dug up so as not to leave a stump behind. In the grow tent at the moment it's looking a little bit packed out because I've just put all the plants in there that I need to keep frost free for now, but I'll arrange that properly later to make sure I can access everything. And just a quick update now, because since filming this we have just had our first frost last night, which of course is the point where a lot of the garden does start to die back to ground level. All plants that I leave out because I've taken lots of cuttings will start to die back as well. So last night I was out in the dark digging up the last of my ensetes and covering over plants with bits of fleece just to give them that bit of extra protection. And so it begins. We've had a lovely mild autumn and now the first of that wintry weather is here. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed and hope that this winter isn't going to be as bad as last winter. But in the meantime, all we can really do is wait and watch and enjoy the beautiful change of seasons, and the frost is sparkling in the morning sunlight glow, which this video really isn't doing credit to. But I'll show you on my next garden update what difference this frost has made. But for now, I'm going to take you back to greener times to take you around another section of my garden. Xanthodecia aethiopica is planted in quite a few areas of my garden. It's hardy and dies back to ground level in winter, but with large tropical foliage and large tropical looking flowers. This is a plant you'll find in most tropical UK gardens. Cordyline Pink Passion adds a dramatic splash of colour. It's drought and salt tolerant and prefers to grow in full sun or part shade. This plant will survive most winters on the south coast, however a harsh winter would kill it. And just behind it I've got a pink canna growing. This I grew from seed from another canna I grow in my garden, so it's still quite small this year and hopefully will look a bit more impressive next year. Strobilanthes diariana is also known as the Persian Shield. I grow plenty of this for its striking purple foliage. And it's very easy to propagate from cutting in water and very fast growing, so I leave the main plant out all winter. My small Albizia summer chocolate is a little bit difficult to see here, as there's only really one leaf that's actually visible. But this is very similar to the Albizia julibrisson that I grow elsewhere in my garden, but with these beautiful red leaves for contrast. I normally grow a few mixed varieties of coleus in my garden. However, this year for the first time I've propagated this one from cutting to see how it gets through winter. Begonia Rex Silver Spirit is a bushy plant that can grow up to 30 centimetres tall. It prefers well-draining soil and partial shade. It's not considered hardy at all, however mine was root hardy last year and I want to see how it goes again this year. But it's so easy to propagate from leaf cutting that if you wanted to experiment and leave yours out, then you can back it up. My Dahlia Twining Smarty continues the pink theme running through this bed. This plant grows well in full sun and should come back again every year. Although this is my first year growing it so far, each flower it produces will have a different combination of colour petals. Alocasia wentii is also known as the New Guinea Shield. Although more commonly grown as a houseplant, it's considered hardy, so I will be experimenting with mine this year. I was given this Cleome a few years ago, and every year I've collected the masses of seeds that it produces, and I've grown it again each year because it's absolutely beautiful. My Nicotiana sylvestris hasn't grown as well as the one I grew last year, which was much taller and had many more flowers on it. But even so, this flower is so pretty, as is the Nicotiana glauca, which is also growing in this area of the garden. I've grown a few of these around the garden this year, so you've probably seen this one before. Hemerocalis fulva is a beautiful flower. Known as the common orange daylily, this is a clump-forming perennial and prefers full sun or part shade. I'm also growing some Canna musifolia in this bed, which was divided from elsewhere in the garden. This plant forms large clumps that can grow up to 3 metres tall. But for more instant height, I grew this Ricinus communis from seed. This is an annual and would die back over winter. I've also grown some sweet corn in this area of the garden, as I love how the foliage on this plant looks so tropical, and yet is a lovely way to combine edible planting. And this variegated gingerbread just adds a little bit of colour contrast to the foliage. This will grow up to about 80 centimetres tall and hopefully will produce orchid-like flowers, which are produced very close to the ground. The Colocasia pink china that I'm growing here was divided from elsewhere in the garden. This is the hardy variety of Colocasia, and here you can see that it's been trying to flower. However, every flower bud that it produces hasn't actually opened up. If it did, it would look a bit like an arum lily. Coming up next, let's look forward to the warmer weather by planting some spring bulbs. It's that time of year again where we're planting our spring bulbs. I know tulips and daffodils aren't exactly tropical, and I'd be interested to hear from you in the comments if you actually grow them yourself in your tropical gardens. But for me, I really enjoy the fact that we get these beautiful splashes of colour coming up very early in spring. So I grow these bulbs in beds and also in pots. And it's specifically in pots that I want to talk about today because we're talking about lasagna planting. If you're not familiar with this term, it's a method for layering bulbs so that you can get the most out of a pot. On the bottom layer, you've got spring bulbs that will typically flower in May, such as late flowering tulips. And above that, you've got bulbs that will flower in April, such as daffodils. And then finally, on the top layer, you've got smaller bulbs that will typically flower in March, such as crocus. Now, I've selected my bulbs that should flower in March, April and May. And for this pot, I've decided to go for an orange and purple theme. So my crocuses I got from Farmer Gracie are Orange Monarch and Herald, which has this lovely deep purple colour under the petals. In my next layer, I'm going to try a Fritillaria, Purple Dynamite. I've not tried this in lasagna planting before, so we'll have to see how that goes. And I've paired it with an orange daffodil called Apricot Whirl. Both of these I've ordered from Garden Wildlife. And then finally, my tulips are Alexander Pushkin for the nice deep purple and Ballerina for the vibrant orange colour. Now in my pots I'm going to be using a peat-free multi-purpose compost with added John Innes, but any multi-purpose compost will be fine. And I've got a couple of pots which I'm going to use to plant these bulbs into. So I'm going to start by putting a couple of inches of the multi-purpose compost at the bottom of my pot. I'm just making sure I break up any big lumps that are in there as well. And now I'm getting the bulbs that I'm putting in the bottom layer of my lasagna planting. These are the tulips. And you may prefer to mix these up a bit and plant randomly. However, I've paired mine one of each type, just to give me a little bit more control as I'm putting them into the pot, as I want to get at least an approximately even distribution between the two colours. Make sure you're planting your bulbs with the pointy bit going up, because that's where the green shoot is going to come from and the roots will go down underneath. It's generally recommended that you leave spacing of a couple of inches between your bulbs, but don't worry too much, your bulbs can even be touching and they will still grow. And I personally prefer a fuller look in my pots of tulips. So once you've got your bulbs planted, it's time to add another layer of soil into your pot. This doesn't have to be very deep, just enough to make sure that you've really covered those bulbs and probably got about an extra inch on top. Don't worry about where you're going to place the next layer of bulbs, because even if you plant them directly on top of the tulips, the emerging shoots will still find a way. And in my second layer, I've got my Fritillaria and my daffodils. In this case, I've only got one Fritillaria bulb, so I'm going to be placing that one in the centre, and I'm going to be placing the daffodils around the outside in a circle. Once again, the pointy part of the bulb points upwards, and the flat part of the bulb is where the roots will come from. This is a lot easier to see in the daffodils than it is in the Fritillaria. The Fritillaria bulb is a little bit flat on top, but you can see here that there are roots underneath, so they're going to go on the bottom. So now this completes the second layer of planting in my lasagna pot. My second pot doesn't have a Fritillaria in it because I actually changed my mind about how I was going to do this after I bought the bulbs. And so then it's time to put that final layer of compost on top of the bulbs. Again, I'm making sure the bulbs are mostly covered and they've got probably about an inch of soil above them. Don't worry that your pot's now getting quite full with soil, because actually the crocuses don't need a lot of depth at all, which is why they go on the top layer. And once again, I'm going to divide my crocuses into two piles with 5 of each colour in each pile, just to make sure that I've got that even spread of colour in each pot. Of course, it's up to you if you want to go for a colour scheme. You might prefer to use all bulbs from one colour, or you might prefer to just mix it up a little bit and make it look a bit more naturally occurring, which is what I've tended to do in previous years. This is the first time I've really tried to put a colour scheme with my lasagna planting. And once again, with the crocus bulbs, you can see that the shoots are starting to grow out of the pointy part at the top. However, if you do plant a bulb upside down, then it's not the end of the world, because the plant will still find its way to grow. Ideally, I probably should have bought a few more crocus bulbs, being as these are a little bit further spread apart than I'd have liked. However, they will be absolutely fine, and I've covered them now with the final layer of compost. And my 2 pots of lasagna planting are now ready, and I just leave these to grow ready for spring. I love lasagna planting and I do this every year. However, I did this video because of a request that I received from one of my viewers. I've also had another request which I'm working on at the moment, but if there are any topics that you'd like to see me cover in Freya's tropical garden, then please let me know in the comments. Next, as part of my visit to Cornwall, I visited Penjerrick Gardens. Penjerrick Garden can be found near Falmouth in Cornwall. Situated on the same road that leads to Drybar, you could easily miss this garden. But if you'd like to have an adventure through a lost jungle, then this garden really is for you. It's the land that time forgot. A secret subtropical jungle. Penjerrick Garden was created around 200 years ago by Robert Weir Fox and his children Anna Marie, Barclay and Caroline. His brother Charles was responsible for the garden at Drybar, which is just down the road, and will be featuring in my video in the next episode. Robert himself was credited with naturalising over 300 species of plants, and there are certainly many interesting varieties to see here. And I'll talk you through some of them later on in this video. But first, I just wanted to give you a little idea of what to expect when you arrive here. At the time of my visit and making this video, the garden's only open 3 days a week from 1:30 till 4:30 in the afternoon. So make sure you check that it's open before you head out there. The house is private and you won't find staff or refreshments. However, there is a hotel opposite the entrance called Penmorval Manor. And here you can purchase drinks from the bar and sit outside looking at the beautiful coastal views. And this was a godsend on my trip because it was a very hot day. The best time to visit the garden is in spring when you can see the rhododendrons and camellias and azaleas in flower. Rachel Morin is the current owner of Penjerrick, who's kindly sent me these photos. But I'd also like to thank those on Instagram who allowed me to use their photographs so that I could show you what the gardens look like at this time of year, as it's definitely very different in October. When you first arrive here, you'll find a small gate that will take you into the garden. Beside it, there are maps, so please don't forget to take one of these with you. Or at the very least, like I did, take a photograph of it, because it is very easy to get lost in this garden. The garden is divided into two, the upper garden and the valley garden. And on the back of the map, you can find a helpful description of the route. I do warn you though that even with the map you can still get a little bit lost in this garden, because one minute you'll find yourself walking down a garden path and the next minute you turn around and you suddenly realise that that path has disappeared into absolutely nothing. There's no mobile phone signal throughout most of the garden, and you may be the only person visiting the garden at the time, which may make you feel very alone if you do start to feel lost. When I visited after I first started to get lost, I did bump into another couple and we kind of got lost together. So once I found my way, I strapped on my GoPro and I decided to record my journey as I walked from the upper garden to the valley garden. So if you are worried about getting a bit lost, you may find it helpful to make sure you've got this video downloaded on your phone. And while there is plenty to explore in the upper gardens, this is the fastest route through to get down to the valley gardens if you're getting a bit stuck. Here you will find an honesty box where you can leave your entrance fee to the garden, which is £3 at the time of my visit. And then you'll make your way through to the main house, which is not open to the public. Dogs are welcome in this garden as long as they are kept on a lead. And once you get to the bottom of this lawn, there are actually 2 routes that you can take to get to the valley garden. As you will need to cross a road to get there, you can either cross the road via the gate, which is the route that I took on this visit, or turn right and it will take you to the bridge. Of course, if you're visiting this garden for a bit of adventure, you may not want to follow the routes planned and just go and explore yourself, which is absolutely fine. And to be honest, I think that's one of the main attractions of this garden in comparison to a more formal garden like Drybar. So this is the gate that leads to the road, and you can see that bridge that I was talking about is just further up the road here. So now we've arrived in the valley garden and there will be plenty more for you to explore in this area. Just one word of warning though, that this is probably not the best garden to visit if you have any difficulties with mobility. You will find fallen trees that you may need to climb over. It can get very muddy and quite slippery in that mud. And although there are benches that you can sit on around the garden, I do advise that you sit with caution because you may find some of them are a bit loose. And I'm just going to point out again that there isn't very much phone signal in this garden. So if you were to slip and have a fall, it would probably be helpful if you've got somebody with you who can then go and get help. But for all my safety tips and advice, this is an absolutely stunning garden. And if you can get a chance to go and see it, I definitely recommend it. So now I'm going to talk you through just a few of the wonderful plants that you can see in this garden. Fuchsia magellanica is one of the hardiest varieties of fuchsia. It will survive down to -15 or maybe even -20 degrees C. And it will continue to flower throughout summer and autumn until the first frosts. There is an abundance of tree ferns growing in this garden, and many of them were introduced at the beginning of the garden design, so are up to about 200 years old. Dicksonia antarctica is a very common sight in Cornwall due to the fact that they were brought over from Australia and used as ballast to hold cargo in place. In milder areas of the UK, these won't need any protection over winter. However, in cooler areas, it's best to put some fleece in the crown. Philostachys nigra is also known as the black bamboo due to the black colour of the canes. It can grow up to 25 metres tall and is a clumping variety of bamboo, so is less invasive than other forms, but care should still be taken. I think this is Philostachys reticulata, which is a running form of bamboo and therefore much more invasive. Blechnum caudatum, or the Chilean hard fern, is native to Chile and Argentina. This is an evergreen fern that will grow up to 1.2 metres tall. It prefers damp soil and partial shade. Gunnera tinctoria is very similar to the larger Gunnera manicata, however it can normally be identified by the fact that its stem has a slight pink hue. Gunnera manicata, however, is much larger and can grow up to 3 metres tall with a 4 metre spread. It's a very thirsty plant and therefore will thrive best next to ponds or in really boggy soil. You'll find lots of wonderful examples of Gunnera manicata in the Valley Garden, as there are 4 ponds in this area of the garden. In winter, the leaves will die back to ground level, and particularly in the cooler areas of the country, they will need some protection over the crown to protect it from the harsher frosts. Most people will do this by covering up the crown with the leaves that they've removed from the plant. Although I'm referring to this Gunnera as manicata in this video, all Gunnera manicatas sold in the UK are actually a cross between manicata and tinctoria, which is known as Gunnera cryptica. Lysochaeton americanus is also known as the Western skunk cabbage. It's been grown in Britain as an ornamental curiosity since the early 20th century. Unfortunately, this plant is now considered an invasive species, and its large leaves do outcompete other plants. Araucaria araucana is also known as the monkey puzzle tree. This is a slow-growing tree that takes 10 years to reach 6 by 3 metres. It prefers to grow in full sun or part shade. There are many rhododendrons here in Penjerrick for you to see, including the Penjerrick cream and this one. Rhododendron Lodery King George grows up to 4 metres tall and has beautiful white flowers in spring. Podocarpus solignus is also known as the willow-leafed podocarp. It's actually an evergreen conifer, but as its name suggests, it actually has very willow-like leaves growing up to 15 centimetres long. It prefers a sheltered position in full sun and is hardy throughout most of the UK. This really was the closest you'll get in the UK to walking through a wild jungle, and I'm sure if you get the chance to visit, you will love it too. Now, coming up next, I finally built my new bed, and I'm going to talk you through how I did it. My tropical garden is slowly expanding. I started it 3 years ago, where I initially only intended it to cover the stony area at the back of my garden, as I had a few plants in pots that I wanted to put in the ground. And now 3 years later, I have increased the size of this, I've added extra beds and I've extended others. And all year this year, I've been wanting to add an extra bed, and it's finally time for me to start building it. Now, of course, the first step before you build any new bed is to decide where you want it to go and what shape you'd like it to be. You may need to consider factors such as how much sun it's going to get through the day, or what condition the soil's in that particular area of the garden. For me, I know that there's a concrete path running underneath the grass, so I had to avoid that area. And I've marked out the area where I want my bed to go with a bamboo border, which I've then sunk into the grass. Of course, you can use other things to mark the area, such as string, spray paint, flour, or shaving foam. But once your area is marked, the next step is to remove the turf. Now, if you don't fancy digging, this can be done by laying some cardboard down on top of the grass and allowing the grass to die back naturally. Simply cover the cardboard with some topsoil and the cardboard will break down. However, if you do decide to dig up the grass as I've done here, then there's a few tips as to how to do that. And firstly, I recommend removing the bamboo border before you start digging. It was only in place to mark the bed. However, when you delegate to teenagers, then these things happen and it's easily rectified. So when removing the turf, whether you want to reuse it somewhere else or you're going to dispose of it, you're aiming to get a thickness of root that's about the length of your thumbnail. The idea is not to have a huge amount of soil like here, but to have just enough for your roots. As you can see, most of the roots are still there. And if you're going to reuse the grass, that will help to keep your grass healthy, but also when disposing of it, you're not adding any unnecessary weight. If you do reuse the grass, then you'll need to water it in afterwards. It's worth noting that the spade that we're using here is not the spade that's recommended for the job, which looks like a spade in a classic deck of cards with a flat, pointed tip. However, this one is getting the job done, so if you haven't got the right spade, then I wouldn't worry too much about it. Ideally, aim to remove your turf in strips, but again, if you're not going to reuse it, then I wouldn't worry too much about that. Next, I'm adding topsoil to the bed, and this needs to be levelled. When levelling soil, you can use a rake upside down like I have here, or you can use a lute, which is a tool that's been specially designed for levelling. Make sure you've got a firm grip of your rake or lute, because the key to levelling is to make sure that you are in control of the level and that you don't let the rake control you by doing it like this. Instead, by keeping good control over your rake, then you can maintain that level as you're going through. Now, as I mentioned before, some grass was left on the inside of my bed, so I've decided to use the cardboard method of getting rid of this grass, just so I've got an opportunity to show you how this works. Of course, this is the perfect time of year for using cardboard because I'm getting quite a few deliveries at the moment. So I'm just using a bit of soil to weight down the strips of cardboard while I put this in place. And I've put the cardboard all the way around the edge of my bed, covering as much of that grass as I can. And then finally putting a layer of topsoil over the whole thing, and you can see that it's looking much tidier now. I'll give it a few months over winter for that cardboard to break down, and then I'll level those edges again in spring. However, I have put a few plants in the ground now, just ones that I wanted to get in the ground before winter hits, as the roots would have been a bit more prone to frost damage if left in pots. But I will leave it till spring till I start planting this area properly. Well, that's all we've got time for today. Now, I do normally aim to produce these videos every 2 weeks. However, due to personal time constraints, I'm going to be aiming to produce them every 3 weeks over the winter months. So I hope you'll be able to continue watching. And thank you, as always, to everybody who continues to support my channel as it grows and improves. I really do appreciate some fabulous comments you've been leaving me. As always, please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and please let me know what you think in the comments below. If you're enjoying this content, then please do make sure you're subscribed to my channel. This is still a new channel, so every subscriber really does make a difference. You can also turn on notifications to make sure you don't miss any of my new videos. And please let me know what you think in the comments, because they really do help my channel to grow. You can also follow me on social media for links to my latest videos and my photo of the day, in which I usually share photos of flowers from my garden, along with their names if known. You can follow me on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, or you can join my Facebook group to ask questions or share photos. And you can find all of my YouTube videos on the Freya's Tropical Garden website, which I will also be expanding to provide advice pages as well as items for sale. Links to these pages are included in my description.